17 Years in the Yoruba Country. The Memorials of Anna Hinderer. Chapter 3. The Gospel in Ibadan. It is thine own, O Lord, who toil while others sleep, who sow with loving care what other hands shall reap. They lean on thee entranced in calm and perfect rest. Give us that peace, O Lord, divine and blessed. Thou keepest for those hearts who love thee best. A. Proctor. On the 25th of April, a few hours after Mrs. Paley and Ellen, accompanied by the Reverend S., now Bishop Crowther, had begun their journey to the coast, Mr. and Mrs. Hinderer left Abeokuta for Ibadan. The account of their journey and arrival there is now to be added in the words of Mrs. Hinderer. We journeyed on and on, one behind the other, very quietly with our long train of attended carriers, full of thought of the past and future. There was something to admire around good pasture and beautiful cattle. Our silence was broken, and we talked of the goodness and mercy which had so surrounded our path in the midst of our sorrow and trials during our short sojourn in Abeokuta. And we could look forward with confiding hope and trust, and take comfort and courage in that we were following the leading of a gracious providence. And now we were on our way to this long-talked-of town, to attack, in the name of the Lord of hosts, this stronghold of sin, Satan. I tried in the stillness of the bush to draw near to the living fountain, to seek help, comfort, and protection in our great undertaking, and I had some precious hours. I soon left my little horse to Olubi's care and got into my hammock, for I was tired. I certainly may say that I have had no little to do the last month or 6 weeks, so that I did enjoy the rest of this hammock, with its cradle-like motion, and a little refreshing breeze sprang up. We did not reach our resting place till quite dusk, but the tent was quickly up, and we had bright lanterns, comfortable tea and prayers, and our people were soon fast asleep on their mats. We walked about by moonlight. We were within reach of the dwellings of man, and people were passing backwards and forwards from and to their farms the greater part of the night. We slept some hours, and after a nice breakfast in gypsy-like style, the next morning we pursued our journey. After an hour, we were quite in the bush. I did enjoy that day's journey. Such nice cool air, trees and scented bushes twining together so thickly that even the African sun could not penetrate. Now and then we stopped to refresh ourselves and to change my carriers, and then sometimes we sang and sometimes talked. Many times we wished our dear good friends could take a peep at us. We halted for the night about 5 o'clock on a rock which seemed spread out on purpose for wearied travellers, but alas, there was no water. We had some in a bottle for our tea, but our poor attendants got none. However, with their usual easy nature, they each spread a mat on the hard rock. Down they threw their weary bodies, and in less than 5 minutes were fast asleep, except those who kept up the fires. I could not sleep. The whole scene and circumstances were so novel. About 8 o'clock, the moon again rose majestically, and a wonderful sight it was. We were now in the midst of an African bush. No human dwelling near us, but how different to what it once was, when the kidnappers haunted almost every bush and wild animals were near. Now all our people were sleeping away, with their guns by their side truly, but only in case any kind of animal should be troublesome. Monkeys, foxes, parrots, owls now and then made a little noise. I often listened with all earnestness for any sound, and I am sure I heard strange ones far away, and have no doubt they were creatures we should not have liked very near. No harm, however, reached us, not even a drop of rain. With all there was to amuse in the night watches, I was very glad to see the morning light, to start quite early, and to sleep without any nervous apprehension in my hammock. When I awoke, I found myself on another rock, with our fellow travellers watching my sweet repose, and they enjoyed a good laugh when I opened my eyes. In the middle of this rock was most delicious water, and very deep. It made us think of the provision God made for the children of Israel from a stony rock. Our people drank heartily, and we had a delicious cup of tea under a mangrove tree, and finding a nice little brook close by, we washed and put on tidy clothes that we might make a respectable appearance in Ibadan, which we expected to reach in a few hours. I now mounted my horse, but certainly it was not so easy jumping over big trees. At the next halting place we saw large tracts of land covered with Indian corn and cotton trees, and the immense town of Ibadan appearing at about 2 miles distance. It was a beautiful sight, and now my faithful affectionate men, for so I must call them, nearly began to quarrel as to who should carry me into the town, for to be carried in my hammock I must, according to their desire. We waited at the town wall and heard that the chief was out of town at one of his farms, so we went in and through it to our little dwelling, which is quite out of it at the other side. But as soon as we touched the town there was such a scene, men, women and children shouting and screaming, "The white man is come, Oibode!" and "The white mother is come." And then there are thousands of salutations, everybody opening eyes and mouth at me. All seemed pleased, but many frightened too when I spoke. They followed us to our own dwelling with the most curious shouts, noises and exclamations. All seemed perfectly bewildered. Horses, sheep, goats did not even know where or which way to go. Even the pigeons looked ready to exclaim, "What is happening?" The people were good and kind enough to let us enter our house by ourselves, but many of them stood round about till sunset just to catch a glimpse of the wonderful white woman. And every time I appeared, down they went on the ground, rubbing their hands and saying, "Alafia, alafia, peace, peace." We could but let them enjoy the treat, though we were not sorry when daylight fading warned them to depart, for with all our comforts and alleviations we were tired enough. We soon unpacked things sufficient for our present necessity, and a good night's rest was very refreshing. We have all this day had people surrounding our dwelling, and we have put our room in order and already feel at home. Chief's messengers have come to inquire after our welfare, and the chief himself intends visiting us on Saturday. The harmonium has arrived quite safely, and we have unpacked all we shall really want while in this abode. I wish you could see it, quite by itself, far from the filth and bustle of the town. A few dwellings here and there, and plenty of trees. From the back we look out upon a forest of feathery palm trees, and I am half inclined to think it a pity to have the trouble of building. This little native dwelling continued to be their home till the end of their first year in Ibadan. It had no upper floor. Indeed, such a thing was unknown in the town, even in the abodes of the chiefs. It comprised what may be called their own apartment, 30 feet long by 6 wide, which occupied the whole length of the building, and 2 wings, each consisting of 2 rooms appropriated to Mr. Kefa, their missionary fellow labourer, to the schoolmaster and catechist, and to the purposes of kitchen and storeroom. Attached to this curious house, at the inner side of the quadrangle, was a piazza, which, besides affording shelter from the burning rays of the sun, served for various useful purposes, such as receiving visitors by day and being the sleeping place of the servants at night. Their own narrow room, with its dismal bare mud walls, mud floor and thatched roof, had to serve for sitting room and bedroom. With cheerful hearts, ever looking on the bright side of everything, and with much ingenuity in contriving, they at once framed a partition and divided the shallow strip into 2 small rooms, which were soon made not only habitable, but homelike. The house had neither doors nor windows, a curtain alone serving for a screen at its entrance, but the inhabitants felt perfectly secure. A robber would be far too much afraid of the white man to approach the house in the dark. They were, however, liable to other troubles. The whole town was exposed to injury from periodical hurricanes, and in the rainy season torrents of water would make their way through the roof of this dwelling, producing great discomfort and doing much damage to their scanty but precious possessions. At all times the grass roof, which had no ceiling under it, harboured spiders and other unwelcome insects which would not be dislodged, and to these must be added creatures of a more noxious kind. One night Mr. Hinderer heard a rustling noise, proceeding, as he supposed, from the compound. Wishing to ascertain the cause, he rose hastily from his bed, and his foot alighted on a venomous serpent, whose bite might have caused his death had the creature turned upon him. Dr. Irving, R.N., who visited the missionaries from Lagos some months later, gives the following description of their habitation. Mr. and Mrs. Hinderer at present live in such a funny little place, quite a primitive mud dwelling, where no two persons can walk abreast at one time, and yet there is an air of quiet domestic comfort and happiness about it that makes it a little palace in my eyes. It is unfortunate, however, for my temples, for in screwing in at one door and out of the other, forgetting to stoop at the proper time, my head gets many a knock. At one end, 6 feet square, is the bedroom, separated from the dining room by a standing bookcase. My bedroom is at one end of this, formed by a sofa, and my privacy established by a white sheet put across for a screen at bedtime. This native dwelling and the more solid mission house, which was built in the course of the year, stood in the southwestern quarter of Ibadan, on the Kudeti Hill, which commands an extensive view of the town, beginning with closely packed houses, low and thatched, spreading over the slopes of the hill on which the old town was built, and continuing into the plain below, where the houses are less crowded together and are interspersed with gardens in which flourish the orange, plantain, banana, and other kinds of trees and shrubs. The whole is enclosed by mud walls 18 miles in circumference, beyond which there is a broad belt of cultivated land 5 or 6 miles in breadth, reclaimed from the bush. The outlying country has been described by Dr. Irving as very beautiful, undulating, watered by numerous clear-running streams, marked in their course through cultivated fields by the more luxuriant vegetation. Everywhere graceful palms rear their tall straight stems and crowning summits of leafy fronds in fine relief against the sky, and wherever the higher grounds command a more extended view, we behold the same lovely country reaching far in the distance, till lost in the faint blue of the horizon. Ibadan has the characteristic features common to the Yoruba towns. The houses are all of one pattern, being a square enclosing a court open to the sky. The apartments occupied by the family are low, dark rooms, without windows, covered by a sloping roof of grass or agidi leaves, projecting beyond the building so as to form a piazza surrounded by posts. Here visitors are received and business is transacted. There are also sheds for the horses, goats, sheep, and poultry which throng the court by day. A doorway leads into the street, forming the only break in its monotonous face of blank mud wall. The streets, however, are diversified by sheds, which serve the purpose of shops, and here and there by orisha or idol houses, and at interval there are open spaces shaded by trees and used as markets. Here, amidst a merry hum of voices, above which are heard shrill sounds which may remind an English listener of the cries in the streets of London, a lively traffic is carried on in the produce of the farms and native manufactures. Of the latter there is a great variety, for in Ibadan there are numerous weavers, tailors, blacksmiths, carpenters, tanners, leather dressers, saddlers, potters, and dyers. Others are employed in extracting palm oil and nut oil and in making soap. But the principal occupation of the people is farming, in which everyone is engaged, whatever other calling he follows, each having a right to such land as he chooses to occupy outside the walls, provided only that it be not already appropriated. When Mr. Hinderer, on first settling at Ibadan, asked what price he must pay for some land which he wished to cultivate, the chief said, laughing, "Pay? Who pays for the ground? All the ground belongs to God. You cannot pay for it." The soil is extremely fertile. Indian corn and yams, the staple articles of food, form the principal produce of the farms, but guinea corn, beans, groundnuts, and cassava are also cultivated, as well as cotton, which is grown both for home use and for exportation. Ibadan, like other Yoruba towns, while nominally subject to a king who resides at Oyo, is in fact an independent state, governed by its own chiefs and claiming tribute and military service from many smaller towns in virtue of the protection which it affords them. Highest among its rulers is the Bale or civil chief, who conducts the affairs of the government. Next to him, and almost his equal, is the head war chief, and these together sit in judgment on criminals charged with grave offences, and likewise settle important cases of dispute between man and man. Below these are a number of inferior chiefs who, besides having rank in the army, act as magistrates in their respective districts of the town and decide all except the most weighty matters for their people. Their services are rewarded by fees, to which they do not scruple to add bribes, and by tribute money, paid by the subject towns. The chiefs have extensive farms, which are cultivated by slaves whom they sometimes number by hundreds, but who are generally treated with kindness, and often possess little plots of ground adjoining their master's property, on which they work when the comparatively light day's task is done. Thus, in course of time, many are enabled to redeem themselves. Others of the slaves are employed by their masters in trading, and they are so implicitly trusted that they are sent out on expeditions which involve an absence of several months at a time, and return when their commission has been fulfilled. Others, again, are war boys, on whose ready service the chiefs can rely in any of their schemes of pillage or kidnapping. Mrs. Hinderer's letters and journals give a lively description of their first settling in Ibadan, and express the thoughts and feelings with which she regarded that important event in her life. May 1st, Sunday. A very interesting day. Many people came, as on every other day. Many thoughts of dear ones at home, but very full of the present scene. Lulayo, a young warrior, interests me much, and said with many others. The words were sweet. On what has this day been sown here and everywhere? Thy blessing, Lord, bestow. May 5th, Ascension Day. I have been comforted today by Keble's words. He to earth's lowest cares is still awake. For at times I do intensely feel my separation from you all, my beloved friends. On such days as these I seem to be among you in thought, and partaking with you in service as in days of yore. And then such a feeling of being very, very far away comes over me, and the thought, shall we ever meet again? As to this world, it must be uncertain, but oh, that I may be permitted to meet you in heaven. A glimmering hope of this dries the eye and cheers the heart. May 8th. Another blessed Sabbath day, people remarkably attentive. They heard of Jesus for the first time and seemed much struck with the message of salvation. The past week has been one of much occupation, putting things to rights and receiving no end of visitors from morning till evening. It requires a little tact and patience to meet the whole thing. I have had some nice little presents of yams, fowls, and fruit. Oh, for wisdom and patience to deal rightly and wisely with these people, to be willing to amuse and give myself up cheerfully to little things, if by any means I may win some. My dear husband is well, always occupied and much interested in everything around him. We do enjoy finding ourselves in Ibadan, and a great holy work commenced. O God, give thy blessing. Whit Sunday, May 15th. I think you might not have been uninterested if you could have seen a certain Anna today, with a large mixed-up class of men and women on the ground, with her 4 little boys who were with her every day, clinging to her, each trying to be nearest at this afternoon school. You must remember they are cramped for room. As I sat on my chair, one little black fellow had clasped my arm with both his hands, another every now and then nearly resting his chin on my shoulder, the other 2 sitting close at my feet. And then such a burst of voices after me repeated the Lord's Prayer in Yoruba, and then 2 of the commandments. The affection of these people is very great, and in these 4 boys it is remarkable. If a fly comes near me, they push it away. I have had a little fever in the week, so did not come out of my room all day. They were wandering about quite disconsolate, and one of them went in the evening to Olubi with tearful eyes, saying he could not find Mrs. all day. And when I came out the next day, they were so delighted. On the 23rd May, the first mail arrived in Ibadan. It is easy to imagine the excitement and eagerness with which the missionaries awaited the arrival of their letters. Mrs. Hinderer tells how they watched for the easy smiling African who might be seen some time before he reached our dwelling, he so entirely unconscious of the treasures he then held in his possession. By the next mail she described the sensations with which these letters were received, and then gave further particulars of their new home and of the arrangements by which she had endeavoured to make it cheerful and comfortable. But oh, what mingled hope and fear in opening these treasures take possession of one's heart. Sad, sad tidings my eye fell upon first, in a note from Mr. Townsend. I told you in my last that poor Mrs. Paley left the same morning we did, but before the vessel reached Sierra Leone, she had joined her husband in heaven. Indeed, we have been dwelling amid solemn scenes. The tales of these few months is certainly beyond description. Oh, if we could not repose in our Father and commit the keeping of our souls and bodies to Him, believing that He doeth all things well, where could be our hope? Where could we find rest? But what inexpressible comfort there is in knowing that we are in such hands, such keeping. My precious home letters tell a tale of joy and sorrow. You can hardly think what the sight even of a kind friend's handwriting is in this far-off land. Newspapers certainly will be a great treat. One feels the lack of these things and the multitude of publications we have had in such abundance in England. The whole world is so full of movement and interests, it is a trial not to know what is going on. Only one newspaper have I seen since I have been in Africa. I do wish some of you could just look at us this evening. A bright lamp, French moderator, now lightens our dwelling. Our various boys with some of their friends sitting in the piazza with their country lamps, teaching each other to read, some Yoruba, some English. We have a nice table, not mahogany nor rosewood, but covered with a bright, cheerful-looking cloth with some beautiful green oranges of delicious flavour, one of the many little kind offerings of my African friends. Now and then a frog hops in to take a survey, but being taken by surprise, it is generally glad to hop out again after a little scream from me, and some long worm-like looking things with at least 100 legs, but my greatest enemies are the mosquitoes. We are very near the bush, which accounts for their constant visitation, but they are, after all, far better than the dirt, noise, and dangers of the town. Our own house, when we can build it, will be sufficiently away from native dwellings to make us fearless for ours, even if the whole town were in a blaze. But these fires are not usual in Ibadan. There is a law that if the person who has been the means of producing such a calamity is found out, all that he possesses is to be taken from him and he put in prison, and this not because it was felonious but accidental. This seems cruel, but the result has been that not a fire has happened here in 5 years. May 26th. I have had many visitors this week, particularly women. Their tenderness over me is touching. If they see me hot, they will fan me. If I look tired, they want me to lie down. I have had much talk with them through my little maid, Susanna. They do indeed receive us with joy and gladness, and we have had many regular attendants on Sunday. They are quite beginning to understand that it is a holy day with us, and I feel sure some are trying to give up Sunday occupation. One woman who was very fond of me was missing last Sunday. She came on Monday and with tears in her eyes told me. Too much work live in her house on Sunday. Her hands were too full and she could not get them out. I was just talking to some new visitors about Sunday. She sat down and told them of all she had seen and heard and begged them to come also. They promised and left. And I lay down in my hammock in the back piazza, very tired. The above-mentioned woman on her way home met 4 of her friends and came back with them. They found me out in my resting place. After talking a little with them, I rather wished them to go, when my old friend said she wished me not to speak another word, but rest. Yet if they might sit down quietly and look at me, they should like it. I mention this to show their kind and respectful and really polite way of speaking, and to describe their tender and affectionate feeling towards me, which must be seen to be fully known. I am still somewhat of a curiosity. The novelty has not yet worn off, and our house is pretty well surrounded all day long. I like to feel that though they have come to look at me and my possessions, they go away having heard the good tidings we have come here to bring, and we only long and pray that they may receive that blessed message of salvation into their hearts. But we are on uncultivated ground, and our work at present, by God's help, is to break up the fallow ground. It has been a cool, lovely day after rain nearly all night and some hours this morning. The sun has not peeped out once, so that at about 3 o'clock we went out, Mr. Keffer too, all on horseback. The town is built on a tremendous hill. We wanted to get to the top, to see its extent, and a wonderful sight it is. Myriads of houses on every side. A queer and rugged pathway we had often to travel, but I have no fear now with my good little horse. We went also through different parts of the town to various markets. They are a pretty sight with their native productions, but oh, the noise! We were surrounded all the way by hundreds with open eyes and mouths. Some made music after their fashion and sang and shouted. Many who had visited us at our house were prepared with an extra welcome. Kola nuts were given me, and I might have had many things. May 29. Another Sabbath day hath reached its close. We have had nice services, many people, and very attentive, and some having come for several days bringing new ones with them is very encouraging. We have now a nice little day school. Some having come very regularly, I gave them blue shirts yesterday, and it was a pretty sight this morning to be greeted by 9 blue boys. I have also now 4 children given me, but as our house is small and they like to go home at the end of the day, we let them. They are here early enough in the morning, a little boy and girl of Olunloyo's. A boy whose father had been quite an enemy of ours, and a little boy without parents, the brother of our schoolmaster. Though he is so young, he has been nicely taught and is quite a help in the school. I feel I have indeed a little charge, but a precious one, and desire that a blessing may be given, that I may have strength and grace to train them up for God, and that they may walk in the right way. I only wish you could take a peep at my little group. The children of the chief Olunloyo were the first whom Mr. Hinderer received into the house. These were Akiele, a boy 4 years of age, and Yejide, a little girl who was about 2 years older. Their first day in the mission compound passed happily enough, as long as the light lasted, but towards sunset, the little girl did her best to persuade Akiele to return home, which he showed himself most unwilling to do. She grew more and more earnest in her entreaties, and was overheard pleading, "Akiele, you must not stay. Don't you know that when it gets dark the white people kill and eat the black?" This terrible suspicion prevailed, and away they both ran, intending, however, to return to their teacher in the morning. It was not long before Akiele ventured to remain for the night, much to the alarm of his sister, who left him with a trembling heart to the mercies of the white people, and returned at the first dawn of day, anxious to know what had befallen him. From this time forward, Akiele, trusting himself to the care of his good friends, was glad to make his home in the mission house. More particulars of this new life are now to be added. June 8. Last week I had to doctor and nurse both my dear husband and Mr. Kefa. They were both down with fever. It is such a curious malady with them, and comes so frequently. They get ill quickly and are very ill for a few days, and then suddenly they are up again and enjoying food. I do not mean to say that I am exempted altogether, but it seems to be quite different. I get hot and languid, lie down, and keep quite still, and as cool as I can, take quinine, and am soon up again. But they are so cold they want blankets and no one knows what, and are far more ill and much oftener. I cannot say how thankful I am to be so well. Tired enough I am by night. My children and housekeeping and visitors keep me going all day. I almost fear for writing. Drawing seems out of the question. However, as I get more and more used to it, I shall more cleverly manage my time. We know children are a great care and trouble at home, and can imagine that they would be rather more so in this country, having been under no control and coming all at once into such a different life. Washing every morning, for instance, is passing strange to them. Once or twice a week is the outside of what they think necessary, and why we want them ever to be quiet and silent is equally strange. They are beginning to comprehend that they must be quiet at family prayers. Nothing composes them so much as music. We always sing a hymn with the harmonium at prayers, with which they are delighted. But though decidedly a care and no slight trouble, I would not for anything be without them. They will lose their wildness in time, and they are so affectionate. Akiele is very high-spirited, but has a most loving heart. He often comes and throws his little arms around me, exclaiming, "My mother thou art!" But he is also extremely passionate. The other day he was beating a boy bigger than himself tremendously. I interfered, and he lifted up his hand at me. Then I had to punish him. He only said he would go home. I said, "Very well, Akiele, go. Goodbye forever." He burst into tears. Oh no, I will never leave my Iya. And he was quite inconsolable till received into favour. They are all happy enough and are a real pleasure to us, and often rouse us a little if we are inclined to be flat or weary. My needle comes into constant requisition, for if strings or buttons are not needing it, a ball bursts. We have erected a large shed and covered it with palm leaves as a temporary church, till we can get a better one. In it we have the day school and services on Sunday. It was very full both times last Sunday. The people sit on the ground and are very attentive on the whole, at least quiet. Sometimes they ask questions in the middle of the discourse and appear much interested. Another time, if you ask them what they have heard, they don't know, they did not understand. June 16th. Mercies multiplied each hour. Through the day our praise demand. I had a fall from my horse on Monday last. It was accidentally pushed from a narrow pathway by a boy down a half-filled hole. I was thrown under it, and I quite expected broken limbs, yet, thanks to our gracious preserver, no harm came near me. Though at the time when it happened this accident seemed to be of little importance, a few days later it was found to be of a much more serious character, and Mrs. Hinderer felt the effects of it more or less to the end of her life. Weeks of sore trial and anxiety speedily followed. Scarcely had she recovered from the consequences of her fall before Mr. Hinderer was taken ill. Night and day she watched and nursed him, often filled with most serious apprehensions. Of her feelings in those days of intense anxiety, she gave the following account in one of her letters. July 1st. Sometimes the sunshine of prosperity is our portion, and a gracious God very near, but we are often in trial and difficulty of some shape or other, or sickness is our portion. My husband has had the sharpest attack of fever he ever had, with the addition of inflammation. Last night was the worst. I was up with him all night. In the middle of it I feared I should soon be left alone in a strange land. He told me he thought he was dying, and if such an event were at hand, expressed what he wished me to do. It was a solemn time, one I shall never forget. Mr. Keffer was at the same time disabled by fever, which deprived Mrs. Hinderer of his assistance. But with heavy hearts she and their faithful servant Ulubi spent the night in watching and administering such relief as was possible, and in those silent hours God gave to his tried servant a submissive heart, calmly resting on his wisdom and goodness. I could only lift up my heart unto God, she wrote, and I am sure the black African boy by my side lifted up his in all earnestness. The sentence in Exodus 3:7, I know their sorrows, has been very comforting to me, and the hope which my dear husband has many times expressed today, that this will draw us nearer to our God and Saviour. Our house and garden have been as quiet as possible, an anxious look on every face, and not a sound from the dear children. The narrative gathered from her journal and letters is continued by the following extracts. July 2nd. We have had a grievous night, sickness every hour. All night and this morning I have had agonizing doubts and apprehensions of what is before me. Tonight I am a little cheered and hopeful, the dear patient sleeping and much less sickness. I know what it is to wish for the morning. The darkness and solemnity of night are painful. I know the darkness and the light are both alike to our God, but the body gets weary and then nervous. Yet I am wonderfully well through God's mercy, not even a headache, which is unspeakable comfort, for I have had 2 or 3 months suffering intensely from headache. But so our gracious God tempers the wind to the shorn lamb and gives abundantly the needful strength in every trying hour. July 6th. Since I last wrote I have been very ill, a sharp attack of fever brought on doubtless from anxiety and want of rest, but I am thankful to be about again, though weak. The good hand of my God hath been over me, and I have had the tenderest care from my still suffering husband. He is, I trust, recovering, but very, very slowly. The alarming symptoms have passed over, but he is intensely weak. It is such a comfort to hear him speak this evening, a little above a whisper. He has indeed been brought to the edge of the grave, and is so altered, I think, you would hardly know him. I have sometimes almost been inclined to ask, can it be he? It must be long before he quite recovers, but I am so thankful that there is a prospect of this blessing. The interest and sympathy of the people have been very touching, coming with a light step and asking in a whisper, Baba Osan dear, is our father better? Our young warrior Olunloyo has come every day and has been truly heartbroken, he told me. I must pray much for my husband. The orange season is just over. We could not get one in the market. I mentioned it to Olunloyo when he sent his servants to the farm, but they came back without any. He was very sorry. Yet I must have some, he said, and he mounted his horse and galloped off to several farms and brought back 11 with great delight. He sat by the bed and saw the dear patient devour one almost greedily. The young chief was so pleased that tears filled his eyes. My husband tried to thank him. Olunloyo lifted up his hand, exclaiming, "Don't speak. I am too glad." He came this afternoon and saw my husband on the sofa. He was very much pleased and told Olubi that many people would be so glad to have the white man well again, that there would be much rejoicing when he could get out once more. They would fire many guns. He himself would give a whole cask of powder. July 10th, Sunday. I must close this day with a few words with my friends. I have been at school twice, and at one service during the service I stayed with my husband. He had a comfortable morning, though rather a trying afternoon. But after tea he revived much and said he should like our usual singing. So now for the gathering. I only wish you could have seen it. Mr. Hinderer on the sofa, Mr. Keffer near him, our Christian visitor on a chair. In the wide doorway on the ground his daughter Martha, a girl of 10 years, our 2 men, Simon and Jacob, our horseman, cook's wife, and 1 or 2 of Mr. Keffer's servants. I at the harmonium with 2 little lamps fixed in wine glasses for convenience sake. On a long bench, close behind me, Olubi, Benjamin, Susanna, schoolmaster, carpenter, and cook. 2 of my boys who were very fond of singing and could keep their eyes open stood 1 on each side of me, sometimes listening and sometimes putting in a few sounds, and then we had a hearty singing truly. These people have the art of catching an air quickly and are able to follow music, and they sang the collect for the day, the 7th Sunday after Trinity, beautifully. Then we had the Lowestoft hymn book box and sang Comfort, Lydia, Arabia, and we finished with Praise God from whom all blessings flow. There was a request that I would sing to them the missionary call. Afterwards I pointed to the dear pictures of Mr. and Mrs. Cunningham hanging over the harmonium and said to them there was no sight that would delight that dear lady and gentleman much more than the present, and told them of our Sunday evenings at home. They were much interested and said they were glad they had someone who liked to sing with them in Africa and who had such a nice instrument. It did us all good. My husband was cheered, and to me it was like a refreshing pool in the midst of a dry and thirsty land. My spirit had been sad and weary. I had sighed for the refreshment of those times when I had gone to the house of God in my own favourite country. I had thought many times of those lines in Tupper's proverbial philosophy. Take courage, prisoner of time, for there be many comforts. Not few nor light are the burdens of life, then load it not with heaviness of spirit. But there is a better word still, and a far better book. Cast thy burden upon the Lord, and he shall sustain thee. And so, amidst trials and discouragements, we have our bright sunshiny places. Yes, many little streams are given us on our journey. Though we are sometimes cast down by reason of the hardness of the way, yet can we sing again. My mouth shall praise thee with joyful lips. More than a month elapsed between the dates of the last and the next quotation. Her silence is accounted for by the recurrence of illness, a hindrance which already in the 4 months since their arrival had made such serious inroads into the work of the mission. The story continues as follows to the end of the year. August 20th. I am again permitted to write to you after a most severe sickness. What a wonderful thing in the midst of all not to have been prevented sending something every mail. With a weak hand I wrote a few lines last month telling you I had inflammation in the lungs. After that was gone I was much worse for 3 whole weeks, touched nothing but water, tea, a little raspberry vinegar, and in very sinking moments once or twice I think they gave me weak brandy and water. A whole week they had looked for my end. Several times I seemed almost gone. I feel I was prayed back to life. For once I was quite conscious and felt the journey of life ending, and that I should be with my Saviour, the body of clay, sleeping the sleep of death, with those who so lately have been taken from amongst us till the resurrection morn. My poor afflicted husband had sent a special messenger to Abeokuta on horseback to request their prayers, and on the day he arrived they appointed an hour in the evening for special pleading on my behalf. In that self-same hour, after an intensely suffering day, I became easier and better. God listened to their cry, and while they were speaking he graciously answered. Here I am, weaker indeed, but getting on day by day, through God's infinite mercy, and I trust for some good purpose to my own soul and the souls of others. Everyone says this is a great encouragement for the future, that I am becoming more Africanized, and shall be less and less affected by the climate. My dear husband, Mr. Kefa, and our good Ulubi shared in the night nursings. My husband had not recovered from his illness, and had fever every evening for weeks, and after a few hours watching was obliged to throw himself on the sofa from exhaustion. Mr. Kefa soon had an attack of fever, and I was deprived of his help. Poor sleepy Ulubi with his master did all they could, and my needs were abundantly supplied. Oh, that I could praise the Lord for his goodness. God has raised me up again, and though I was sorry at one time to be called back to the things of time and sense, yet with returning health and strength I can but rejoice at being spared a little longer. I trust for the glory of God, to my thankful husband, to the little bright black faces which attend our school, and to many a tearful eye which has greeted me since I have been up. The weather is cool, which is helpful to me, and I go out often in a hammock. I was amused to hear that you remarked, when I said in my letter I laughed at something, that it was the first time you had heard of my laughing in Africa. I assure you I do laugh very often. It would be against my nature not to laugh. I am now in the best of spirits, cheerful and happy, and often laugh at my snail-like pace. And what would you say to see me, instead of jumping up 2 steps at a time, and frisking about, crawling about our little arm and feeling it a long journey? August 26th. I have had a treat today, my 16 school children, to dinner. They were so good while I was ill that I wished to give them a treat when well again. We gave them a large bowl of palava sauce with a huge quantity of beaten yams. Afterwards pictures, then an examination as to what they had learned in school. A little talk, which was followed by a good game at ball. Then each had a present from my toy box, such as a knife or a box of cowries. They were delighted indeed, and after a little more eating of agidi and an orange, I sent them off by 6 o'clock, and then we had visits from their parents to thank us. It was a real pleasure to me to see them getting on so nicely, 4 of them now beginning to read the Yoruba Testament. All have learned Watt's Little Catechism, which has been translated. 2 were also learning the English primer. They extremely like to learn English sentences and names of things. I am always saluted by them with, "Good morning, ma'am." When walking out with my 4 boys, they tell me Yoruba names of things and then ask for the English in return, and they remember the English name much better than I do the Yoruba. A mistake now and then occurs. One boy had come to school for a short time and had picked up a few words, but was called away to the farm and of course forgot them. The other day he paid me a visit, and poor fellow had evidently been trying to think of his former salutation, but only the word yes could be remembered. I was sitting writing in the piazza when suddenly I heard with the strongest emphasis, "Yes," and I looked up at a countenance full of satisfaction at his salutation. It was too ridiculous for my 4 boys, who were sitting on a mat over a picture book. They all laughed heartily, but took the poor fellow and very kindly taught him his forgotten English. It was quite a scene. My 4 boys go on most comfortably together, and I am quite encouraged about them. Akili, the youngest of them, fell asleep once during the Sunday evening singing and was carried to his mat. The next morning he came to me saying, "Iya, I did not say my prayers last night. Shall I now?" I am teaching them to sew and to knit, for I want occupation for them, as the school only lasts from 9 to 12. From 5 to 6 we generally walk, play ball and all sorts of things, and Iya must play with them as well as work. Their great delight is truly doubled when my husband will run and let them catch him. So with one thing and another, you can believe I have not much idle time. We have very pleasant Sunday evenings over the Noah's Ark or Mrs. Buxton's beautiful scripture pictures. After that, the whole household come in for singing. The children are now very good at church. On Sunday, in speaking on the vanity and helplessness of idols, Mr. Hinderer quoted the psalm, "They have mouths and speak not." The boys burst out laughing and said it was true, very true. This was not very decorous, truly, but it showed they were attentive. The other day, one was with us in a compound where a man told us God was good, for he gave them orishas. The child instantly replied, "No, God did not. The devil gave us orishas." Our palm leaf shed has stood the rainy season very well and has been nicely filled. We recognize a few regular attendants and all like Sunday school. One young woman has been a constant attendant and a frequent visitor. She bought a Yoruba primer and was very diligent in learning to read. Her husband, who is one of the great men with a multitude of wives, gave her into her father's hands, who was a thorough idolater, for coming to church and taking book. They asked after the book, but she refused to give it them, so then she was put in chains for 3 days. On the following Sunday she came to church. We did not see her for more than a week, when one evening in the dark she came to us to say she had been punished again, but not so much. She said they told her to read the book she had, so she began the alphabet, which was all she knew, and being unintelligible to them, they were angry. They have not prevented her coming to us now, but they are very anxious she should give back such a fearful thing as that book, which will do harm to her and her family. Mr. Keffer has been twice disturbed in public preaching, ordered away from under the tree. "We will not have you white men. You are the world's spoilers." September 11th. A very bright Sunday. I awoke singing, "Oh, may my heart in tune be found, like David's harp of solemn sound." I am thankful I did value my Sunday privileges. I cannot help on Sunday longing once more for my corner in St. Peter's. I long to hear our beautiful prayers in an English church. I am generally rather low on Sunday in heart. I can get hold of so little Sunday feeling. The scenes and sounds around us are so different from home. Drums, guns, farms, markets, all the same as any other day. And though I can heartily mingle my amen in our simple shed, yet all seems strange. What a comfort our God is not confined to time or place. I only long for my soul to be filled more and more with the quickening and enlivening influences of his blessed Spirit, to rise above things temporal, and to lay hold on things eternal, that as earthly comforts and privileges fail, I may be so hidden in the rock and live so near to the fountain, that I sigh not so much for the streams, and that I may rejoice in the Lord in the midst of all. But one is apt to get flat and cold and heartless sometimes, and to go down, down. Oh, my dearest friends, we need your prayers, lest we faint and be weary and feel the hardness of the way, instead of rejoicing to be counted worthy, looking into the future. In my late illness one Monday night, a cloud hung over me and hid all that was bright. All at once it came into my mind that it was the day of the monthly missionary meeting at Lowestoft, when many were not only praying for the heathen, but for those of their own country who were dwelling in the midst of them, that they might be comforted and refreshed in hours of sickness and sorrow. I was quite cheered and revived a little. The thought of your constant remembrance of us was and is always a comfort. Abudu came to us on Monday, a nice bright little fellow. Ifa gave notice at his birth that he was to be a book boy, so his father gave him a Mohammedan name. October 1st. Mr. and Mrs. Townsend came to pay us a visit. We were very glad to have them with us in our little dwelling, which I was almost inclined to think must be made of something elastic, for we packed in very comfortably and were truly glad of a little white society. The people were astonished and frightened too to see 5 white people together, and when we all went out it was amusing and fatiguing enough. We are still much surrounded by visitors who wonder at all they see. They think me much more industrious than I think myself. They laugh to see me write and wonder that I can read so many books, and the wonderful things I can do with the needle and scissors make them open their mouths and say, "Ah, ah, ah." Our school does not increase at present. People are afraid to send their children. They think book will make them cowards, but those we have are going on very nicely. One Sunday at school, I endeavoured to explain some of the texts which they had learned, at least to talk about them. They spoke a long time to each other about the eye of the Lord being over the righteous, but his face being turned away from those who were wicked. They looked very sorrowful, but soon one said, "It is only the devil God does not look at." On the text, Jesus did no sin, neither was guile found in his mouth. One said, "I was good, very good, more good than anybody. The devil was very wicked. He himself was a good boy, and Robert and Akiele. Idowu was naughty sometimes, but he evidently was happy in the thought that they were all extremely good." It is very interesting to have them talk out in this way, and it makes me very anxious to get on with the language, that I may hear them always and be able to answer them. You would smile to see us trying to understand one another. They are so fond of singing, and after their evening prayers they now begin to sing "There is a Happy Land" very prettily. Last night, after it was finished, one of them clapped his hands and said, "That is sweet." I sometimes feel sad at the thought how little I do, how little there is I can do, and then I look at these little creatures and hope they are being trained for future good, so I take comfort. My little black boys are my greatest occupation, so that they and their doings, or mine with them, are interspersed through everything, for I am mother, playfellow, teacher. November 19th. This has been an eventful week. On Monday the 14th we commenced building the wall of our compound. The foundation of our house also is laid, and the corners built up a little way. The first floor will be about 6 or 7 feet high, which will be used for stores, and we shall mount up and have 3 good rooms and smaller rooms made in the piazza. I can hardly fancy I am to have such comfort, yet it is with a loose hand one holds it. The uncertainty of everything, especially here, makes one only long for the house not made with hands, eternal in the heavens. Yet, if it pleases God to spare us a few years, it will be very desirable, and we may accept it gratefully, an earthly dwelling, secure from the rain and wind, and room to turn round in. We have a class on Saturday for candidates for baptism, some of our own servants not being baptized. A woman of this town has joined it. She has attended regularly every Sunday for 4 or 5 months, giving up all Sunday labour. She seems to have long desired to know the right way to serve God, feeling that orishas were of no use. She joined the Mohammedans, but that did not meet the want of her heart either. Now we do hope and pray that in hearing of Jesus the Saviour, the way, the truth, and the life, she may find him her all in all. November 21st. This will greet my beloved friends in the new year. This year will have passed away with its multitude of events, but its unnumbered mercies cannot cease to be remembered. The uncertain future is before us. Shall we fear to tread it? No. Mercies past only encourage one to hope and to commit the keeping of our souls and bodies unto our faithful Creator. Oh, for grace to live nearer and nearer to him, and to be found more and more meet for the kingdom above. I have found it is not our circumstances or position in life which will tend to this. We need not bid for cloistered cell, our neighbour and our work, farewell. Not the more passive life in Africa, or the more active and busy moments of Lowestoft, will help us in communion with our God or lead us nearer to heaven. The Holy Spirit must be our guide, our helper, our defender, with watching and prayer in ourselves. December. It is a heart-cheering sight to behold Sunday after Sunday such a goodly gathering as we have, and they are so quiet and attentive. I think I told you we had a young schoolmaster, but we have given him up in order to have a man who can go about in the town and talk and be of use to the people. This was more necessary to us in this immense town, and as they could not afford us both from Abeokuta, we were glad to be able to choose between the two. We have made a sacrifice and given up our faithful Ulubi for the school. It is a sacrifice, for he was the only one in the house we could look to for everything. But he is a good creature and very ready to give a helping hand when school is over, and I believe he will make an excellent schoolmaster. He is so fond of children and has so much heart in everything. The dear children are very ready to receive instruction, and it was quite a grief to them when they had a few days' holiday, they were not a little delighted to have some lessons with me. It is so interesting to watch their opening minds. I asked one of my little boys if he liked to sit down with me. "Oh, yes, indeed I do," was his answer. "Why?" "Because I learn so many nice things here, and you, Iya, love me and are so kind to me." I asked, "Do you love God?" "Oh, yes, because he is so great and good." "Do you love Jesus?" Yes. "Why?" I asked. But that seemed too much to explain. It seemed too deep, and he ended with saying, "I want to hear more of Jesus and no more." The first quotation from the memorials of the next year begins with another sad record of illness, and soon Mrs. Hinderer was able to resume her work and encouraged by tokens that God's blessing rested on her labours. January 20th, 1854. I have again been laid very low, in consequence, in some measure, I doubt not, of the late anxious nursing of Mr. Keffer. When a fellow labourer is brought down to the gates of death, all one's endeavours, anxieties, and sympathies are called forth, and one feels the effects afterwards. The body and the nerves suffer. But we are also passing through the trying season, the Harmattan. I have had lingering fever. I feel very weak and unable to do anything. The bed and the sofa are very much my resources, and I cannot get round as I usually do. However, we hope on and are as cheerful as is possible with a weary body of clay. My dear husband is always cheerful and cheering, never despairing, never doubting, never distrusting. Even in the dark cloudy day he passes on with all his burdens. I must confess I have had a low time and have been walking on the dark and shady side of life. I have felt, what am I? And could not bear to be looked at by the people who are all day watching us. I felt that they must think me a very lazy white woman, but yet I think my pale, thin face and tottering limbs must have been an excuse for me. However, the happiest way of thinking was that this was my time of education and preparation for future work, and so I endeavoured to lie passive, only seeking to be made entirely resigned to do or to suffer my Father's will. This is a grace one especially needs in a missionary's calling. You come with a desire to do something. You see your work before you, see thousands of children, hundreds of people, and you are utterly helpless in mind and body. It is hard work, and only one can give strength to bear it. Oh, that it may all work in me the good he designs who sends it, the spirit of patience, meekness, gentleness, forbearance, and love. God has been gracious, and he has promised never to leave nor forsake us. I do feel and believe this, but I long for more of the spirit of repose, confidence, and assurance in the suffering day and in the time of weakness. Truly, the African climate is fearful, and it seems to me that it will require the sacrifice of the gold that perisheth and of life to a considerable extent before it can be helped by her own sons. God calls for this. Will men hear or not? They will not repent the sacrifice in the better world. Oh, that there may be a true church here, boldly to lift up a standard against error in the name of the Lord of hosts. February 21st. Now I must tell you some of our encouragements, not perhaps conversions, but something approaching thereto. Many people in this town are not exactly slaves, but are in pawn. Their parents have wanted money perhaps, and have given their children a security so that after a time the one in pawn has to work so many days for his master without any reward, and the remaining days, according to the master's generosity, for himself to earn enough for his entire food and clothing. A poor fellow in this position came to church whenever his master's working day did not fall upon a Sunday, and became so interested in all he heard that he said he could not work on a Sunday. He should beg his master to give him that day always, and he would give him one of his own weekdays. Now that is something like self-denial, is it not? One of our church builders also is full of inquiry, and says his heart cannot sit down, he cannot follow his past fashion, neither can he take the white man's fashion altogether. Our sawyer is a heathen from Abeokuta, whom we begged to come and saw for us. His friends sent for him the other day to go and make the usual country fashion with them. He sent them word, no, since he had been here he had seen and heard things so different. They begged, they threatened. He said he could not help what they did, but he could not join with them again in their heathen worship. He attends church regularly and Sunday school too, and is eager to learn to read. There are some other hopeful signs. A country priest who has troubled us and tried to prejudice others against us came the other day saying, "I get no peace. I want to give my heart to God." A famous priestess came to convert us, but returned to think for herself and has had some serious talks with Ulubi. So we are greatly encouraged in our work, and if thus permitted to do something for Christ's sake, what is a little suffering or an earlier grave? White and black will the sooner rejoice together, and the time be hastened when all shall know the Lord from the least to the greatest. There is plenty to do, and I long to do it. I am certain there is more pain in sitting still than in the hardest work, but I find I must go softly or be laid by altogether. Africa is not England. I am not strong, but not ill either, and as time rolls on, I hope to be stronger. And in the compulsory retirement from continual active life, I trust there is some ingathering for one's own self and for the good of others in my future course. The house is making great progress. After my return from Abeokuta, we go into it. We do both look forward to it with real pleasure and have bright visions with God's help of going to work in good earnest in divers ways. Up to this time we feel to have done nothing or hardly commenced, not at least in a way satisfactory to ourselves, but with feeble means God will do his own blessed work, and we hope and desire from the depths of our hearts to be more entirely used for his honour and glory and for the good of Ibadan. Reference is made in the above extract to an expected absence from home. Mrs. Hinderer had been for some time so much out of health that under the advice of Dr. Irvin, who had spent a fortnight with them in March, she was persuaded to go to Abeokuta to recruit. Mr. Hinderer accompanied her, but after a few days returned to Ibadan to hasten the completion of the building of their house. The following letter is dated: Abeokuta, April. It was by no means easy to get away from home, and I felt it much. The dear boys were so sorrowful. They came a little way on the road with us after many promises before leaving the house that I would not go to England when I got as far as Abeokuta, and when we halted under a tree to take a final leave for a time, I got off my horse, and if you could just have seen it, you would have said, African children have hearts, and very tender loving ones too. One of my boys, about 10 or 11 years old, could bear it no longer. He laid his head on my side and sobbed, and as he could get the words out, said, "Go, dear Iya, and make haste back," and then turned his face in steps towards home. You will not think me egotistical, but this I do think: if I am come to Africa for nothing else, I have found the way to a few children's hearts, and if spared, and I have health and strength, I think I shall not, with God's blessing, find it very difficult to do something with them. An inundation of 7, whom I expect to come to me when I return, seems rather formidable, but I do not fear it if I am well. If you can get at their affections, you can get obedience, and I think that is generally secured beforehand. I have had many visits from them, and they are watching as eagerly as anybody for the completion of the house, that they may come and sit down in it. My boys that I have now would never tell me an untruth, or touch a cowrie, or anything they should not. This is truly wonderful for heathen boys, brought up all their lives hitherto in the midst of every kind of deceit. Dear fellows, I feel sure the love and blessing of God is over them, and their young hearts are opening, I humbly trust, to receive him as their only God and Saviour, and I hope I am very thankful to have found favour amongst them. I must add, though I may fill a larger place in their affections, having more to do with them, yet Baba, my husband, shares in it considerably. There has been a fine gathering of black heads for the morning service, attentive listeners to the story of what was accomplished for them and for all on this day, Good Friday. The text was, "It is finished." I thought of the sermon I had heard from these words in my own tongue and country, and I felt a weary, thirsty spirit for past privileges. No one knows what a loss it is. I felt with Keble in his poetry for yesterday. It was a real striving to keep the lingering flame in my own heart alive. May 9. I long to be at home again, and grudge every hour from my beloved Ibadan. Only the assurance and advice of everybody that I ought to have some sort of change could have moved me. Tomorrow we hope to be on our way to Ibadan, and we go with joy and gladness of heart. I cannot be thankful enough to be able to return with renewed health and strength, and I hope never to have occasion for any more again till we leave for dear England once more. There is a great cry for Iya to go home again, and I certainly feel there is no place in all Africa like that home. But we are going somewhat with the feeling of St. Paul when he said, "Not knowing the thing that shall befall me there, but the fear not of him who cannot change goes before us, and under its shield we can indeed go on our way fearlessly." After her return, she made the following remarks on her visit to Abeokuta. The kindness and hospitality of Mr. and Mrs. Townsend are never to be forgotten. I enjoyed being under their roof and with them, and was much interested in all that is going on around them. Mrs. Townsend cared for me as a sister, and as a proof of its benefit under God's blessing, I will quote a remark of my little maid Susanna. At first she would say, "Please, ma'am, too much bone live here," but when we were about returning, for she sighed for Ibadan as well as myself, "Please, ma'am, bone all gone away. I think we may go home now." It certainly would not have been very pleasant to lose all my bones, but there was some satisfaction in having them covered, and I fully agreed with Susanna on its being time to get back.